But with the two-way, you can program it in via the keypad and via the software itself. We'll now show you how you can program the radio transmitters in via the software, which you couldn't do with the one-way. The first thing you need to do is, as you would have done with the one-way, you first of all got to add the group, the wireless transmitter. To do that, you right mouse click onto zones and go new wireless zones. You then select the zones that you want. So in this case, because you've got to start at address number 2, that will be at address 2. If you had more than 16 zones, you would then add another one, another 16 zones, another 16. Even if you've only got one receiver, you could then still go and add the zones that you want to add to get the number of zones that you're activating. Keep in mind that, the M1 will support 144 zones of wireless with or without additional radio receivers. So you just, as I said, just go and check add the extra zones. So if we're getting a radio key in, we then select the zone that you want to program it in. In this example, I'm going to program it in on zone 17. So I select zone 17 under my wireless group. We then give that radio key a name. On this example, I'm just going to call it radio key demo. We go down to the definition and we select the definition being a radio key fob, or just a key fob as the definition. We then go to wireless setup, and when we go into wireless setup, the first thing we need to do is to check it that it's, to enable that device, so it's going to work, of course. We have to make sure, because it's a radio key that can be taken off site and it doesn't send supervision, we make sure that the not supervised option for supervision is selected. Obviously, if you leave that at normal supervision, then the next day the customer's going to get a loss of radio detection device because that radio key isn't on site anymore. It hasn't been activated. So you make sure for radio key it's not supervised. We now have an option under some special condition. Normally, in programming of an M1, the buttons are programmed as button 1, 2, 3, 4. If we select option 1 on, then under some special circumstances, those 4 buttons under programming for this radio zone or the radio key, those buttons, instead of programming it in the M1 programming as button 1 to 4, they're now programmed as 5 to 8. So we now get some additional programming if you wanted to use that. Under the key fob number, all of them are defaulted at user ID 99. But you can program that to match perhaps the user's PIN code, or alternatively you can even map it to something else, or can take it up to code number 204 up to 255. So even though you can't, if you set this radio key fob, for example, as number 210, even though you can't put a name to it like you could if you named it at, say, 110, you can still use it, so you'll know that key fob number 210 armed or disarmed the system. So you've got that the same as you did with the one-way. Now, to program in the TXID in the system, normally with one-way, once we learnt it in via the keypad and we upload the data, it would automatically populate this data in here for us. But if this was a new system and we're now programming it in via the RP software, not programming it in via the keypad, we can manually type that TXID in. And where we get that from, on each transmission device, there's a sticker on the back and will tell us what the TXID is. It almost tells us what the TXID is. There's actually a 7-digit number in there, and in the TXID field, we don't use that whole number. What we use the first digit and the last 5 digits. So the second and third we don't use. So therefore, under TXID, for this example on the left here with the radio key fob, I would type in F9278A. I wouldn't put the 1 and 0 in. So the first number and the last 5, and then RP will automatically put a 0 at the start of it to buffer that out, and that's the number you would put in. The DL and HID numbers would automatically be entered once as you're putting that number there in. On this example, if it's a radio reed switch, again the first number, in this case it's an A, and then 9269C would get entered in there. First digit and the last 5 digits. And in this case the PIR, we put the first digit being a 4 and the last digits being 9316A. So that's how you just instantly look at the code there. So before you mount a reed switch, before you mount a PIR or whatever, it's a good idea to get that number off the device before you mount it. Otherwise you'll curse when you've got to take it off to get that transmitter ID, or obviously you've got to then learn it in via the keypad. Okay, so they're just going back as a recap of what we said. First digit and the last 5 digits, and that's what would be entered, and RP would automatically put a 0, or you can put it. So once you've learnt that, put that TXID in, you then, because it's a radio key fob, you leave loop 0 set for 0, hit save, and that radio key fob would start working. It would start as default, arm and disarm the panel, and button 3 and 4 are not enabled on the system, but 1 and 2 for arm disarm are enabled. Bang, it starts working. If we're going to learn a radio read switch in, on this example I'm going to put a radio read switch into zone 18. So I select zone 18, I then go up to the name, we give it a name. In this example I'm going to put it read switch front door. We then go to the definition, whether you want to have it as a perimeter, whatever you're going to put that zone, exactly the same as you would as a hardwired. What area is it going to be, forced arm, etc., etc. So you select all the attributes and the definition exactly as you would a hardwired zone. And again, go into the wireless setup. It's much the same as the key fob. We enable it. Under now the supervision, we can leave it at normal supervision or turn supervision off, whatever tickles your fancy. But they're all read switches are supervised, so we can leave the supervision on. The options don't matter for read switch, so we leave all those off. The key fob user ID, again, it's not applicable because it's not a radio key fob, so we leave that. No matter what you change, it's not going to matter. And again, exactly the same under the TXID. We look at the sticker, the first digit and the last 5 digits. So in this case, A9269C, because obviously every transmission device would have a different TXID on them, which is a code in there, and put that in. And then because it's a detection device, that needs to be, the loop needs to be set for loop 2. Okay, so you put that at loop 2, save, and the read switch will then start working. The PIR, when we're putting a radio wireless PIR, in this example I'm going to put it on zone 19. So we go down to zone 19, give it a name. In this example it's an entry PIR. You set the configuration for it, whether you're going to have entry exit, it's going to be a follow, it's going to be whatever you want it to work for. Set the attributes exactly the same as you would a hardwired, forced arm, chime, or whatever you want it to be. We then go up to the wireless setup, click on wireless setup, and we program again exactly the same as we did the other devices. We enable it. The supervision we set to normal supervision or turn it on. Again, it's a supervised device, so you can leave it set for normal supervision. You don't set this as a PIR. This device is a PIR for auto restore. This one is more as a legacy from the one-way, so you don't have to select this device as a PIR. For the two-way, you can leave that blank. Again, the radio key fob, it's not applicable because it's not a radio key, so it's not applicable. And the TXID, again, exactly the same way. You put the first digit, which is a 4. Most PIRs start with a 4. Key fobs start with an F, etc. So it's a 4, and then the last 5 digits, 9316A. So the first digit and the last 5, that's on there. So second and third wouldn't be entered. And again, being a detection device, we put that to loop 2. So as you can see, programming it from the RP software can be a lot easier because all you have to do is enable it, check the supervision, put in the TXID and the loop number, save it, and the job's done. If we go under wireless setup, we just select the zone wireless setup. You can see the 3 devices that we've put in. You can see they've enabled what the supervision set for, any option boxes. The hardware loop is 0 for a radio key, and they're all 2 for detection devices. As we then click on key fob events, if it's a radio key fob, there are our 4 buttons, 1, 2, 3, 4. So as default, button 1 is to arm away. Button 2 is for momentary. If you don't want to use those for arming and disarming, you can disable them here and enable them under rules to use them whatever you want to do, and therefore you can have any button that can be used for any other application the same as you could one way. The button 3 is the inquiry button, so if you give it a short press, it's going to tell you, the LED is going to tell you the status of the alarm or that area that this key fob can control. And if you want to use that for activation and you've got something programmed in for button 3 here or under rules for button 3, when you push and hold that button 3 for more than 4 seconds, it will then activate the event.